The convoy moved steadily across the Afghan desert at first light. 3 Humvees and an armored ambulance marked with bold red crosses, symbols that only meant something to those still clinging to the idea of rules. Staff Sergeant Riley Shaw gripped the wheel of the ambulance. Her hands steady as dust from the lead truck drifted over her windshield in a soft, brown veil. She'd been driving for Forward Operating Base Liberty exactly 3 weeks, long enough to fade into the background for anyone who mattered. The radio buzzed with routine chatter as the column neared the outer fence. Riley eased the ambulance through the checkpoint, giving a nod to the guards who barely noticed her. Another supply run done. Another uneventful day behind the wheel while the so-called real soldiers handled the action. She parked in the motor pool and began her post-run inspection with that quiet, meticulous rhythm of someone who found order in small details, though no one cared enough to notice. A few yards away, Staff Sergeant Evan Cross and his fire team were unloading gear, their conversation loud enough to carry. Cross had that sharp-edged confidence that came from surviving multiple deployments and never letting anyone forget it. His men orbited him like smaller stars around a sun, Specialist Reed, Corporal Cole, and Private Harris, young, restless, eager to prove something. "Heard we're getting a driver for the next op," Reed muttered, checking his rifle. "Please tell me it's not the ambulance chick again." Cross laughed, the sound echoing toward Riley as she crouched by a tire gauge. "Shaw's fine for supply work. Point A to point B, no problem. But a combat op? She'd probably lock up the first time around cracks overhead." "Why's she even here?" Cole added. "We've got plenty who can drive and shoot." "Exactly," Reed said. "What's the point of one who can't?" Harris stayed quiet, not joining in, but not defending her either. The message was clear enough. Riley Shaw was dead weight, a placeholder in a slot that should have gone to someone useful. She ignored it. She'd heard this kind of talk her entire deployment. Words like that bounced off her now. Experience had taught her that the loudest ones were never the ones who held steady when things got ugly. She finished her checks, logged her mileage, and headed for a few hours of rack time before the next shift. But Chief Logan Ward, watching from the maintenance bay, saw something different. The way she moved, controlled, deliberate, wasn't how ordinary drivers carried themselves. During the morning briefing, she'd stood with her back never exposed to a doorway, eyes constantly tracking potential entry points. Even her M4 rifle, the standard issue for everyone, looked too well kept. It wasn't just spotless, it was tuned. The attachments, the sighting setup, the balance, all arranged in a way Ward had only ever seen once, during a classified briefing on maritime special operations. One late evening, Chief Logan Ward found Riley Shaw alone in the motor pool, reorganizing her ambulance long after most had turned in. The standard supply layout was fine, but she was reworking it. Trauma kits positioned for one-handed reach in dim light. Tourniquets lined up for instant grab. Heating packs arranged exactly like the setups used by special operations medics working deep in hostile zones. "That's a pretty unique configuration you've got there, Shaw," Ward said from the doorway, voice calm, unreadable. Riley's hands stilled for half a second before she kept moving. "Just making things more efficient, Chief. Everything needs to be within reach if we start taking casualties en route." He stepped closer, studying the layout. "That's not regulation ambulance setup. That's a combat medic loadout built for high-threat ops." There was no accusation in his tone, just curiosity, the professional kind. Riley looked up, her brown eyes giving nothing away. "Old habits," she said quietly. "My last assignment had different standards." Ward didn't press further, but he logged the detail, adding it to the growing mental list that didn't fit her official record. Everyone stationed at Forward Operating Base Liberty carried pasts they didn't talk about. She just hid hers better than most. The next Tuesday, an intelligence brief came in like so many before it. Routine, shrugged off. Reports said enemy activity across the region had surged over the last 2 weeks. Drone feeds showed erratic troop movements. Comms intercepts hinted at coordination between groups that normally fought separately, and local sources had gone silent. Never a good sign. The analysts attached the same old checklist: raise security, tighten patrols, increase vigilance. On paper, everyone acknowledged it. In reality, no one believed the threat was real. Liberty had been quiet for a year. The calm had bred a dangerous kind of confidence. During her weekly staff meeting, Lieutenant Colum, Marion Holt skimmed through the assessment, while her department heads sat with faces that mixed mild worry and habitual indifference. Elevated threat levels across the sector, she read aloud. Possible joint action against coalition bases. Recommend perimeter reinforcements and restricted movement during high-risk windows. She looked around the room. Same as always. Stay sharp, follow procedure. Don't assume we're safe just because we've been lucky. Questions? None. They'd heard identical warnings for months, and nothing ever came of them. A few scattered shells, the occasional IED found on patrol. Nothing serious. Liberty still felt like one of the safer corners of Afghanistan. Riley caught wind of the report the way she caught most things, secondhand. The summary posted in the motor pool was brief, sanitized, and easily ignored. But unlike her peers, she didn't brush it off. That week, she doubled her checks. Fuel lines, armor seals, electrical systems, anything that could fail under fire. She made sure her rifle carried a full combat load and that every spare mag was clean, functional, and ready. She walked the base at dusk, memorizing routes, corners, and spots that offered cover. Just habit, she told herself. Muscle memory. But old instincts don't fade just because your MOS code says something different now. At 02:37 hours, under a moonless sky, those instincts proved right. The first rocket screamed out of the darkness and slammed into the fuel depot, erupting in a blast so massive it turned night into false daylight. The fireball set off every alarm at once, ripping the entire base from sleep to panic in seconds. Riley was on her feet instantly. No confusion, no delay. The sound had a signature she recognized before thought could even form. Incoming fire, major assault. Get to your vehicle. The order was instinct more than thought. Riley Shaw was dressed, armed, and moving within 30 seconds while most around her were still dragging themselves from sleep, trying to make sense of the chaos. Before any real coordination could begin, 6 more RPGs tore through the night sky in rapid bursts, each one landing with surgical precision, stepping their explosions across Forward Operating Base Liberty like someone tracing targets on a map. The command center vanished in a plume of fire. The comms hub erupted next, and then the generator site went up. One brutal hit that threw half the base into darkness, the only light coming from burning wreckage and emergency strobes. Then the mortars began. Not the sporadic harassment fire they'd sometimes endured during quiet months, but deliberate, calibrated impacts from multiple firing points working in sync. The enemy had studied their defenses, marked out the weak spots, and now dismantled Liberty piece by piece, knocking out infrastructure before the ground assault they all knew was coming. Riley sprinted low across the open yard, moving like muscle memory guided her steps. Her ambulance sat exactly where she'd left it, the armored hull reflecting the orange glare of burning fuel. Quick scan, tires intact, frame solid, engine untouched. Good. The keys, always kept in her pocket, slipped into the ignition as she yanked open the door. The radio inside was alive with overlapping voices, static, and panic. All units, multiple breaches on the north and east perimeters. QRF deploying to Sector 3. Medical, prepare for mass casualties. Repeat, mass casualties expected. Riley grabbed the handset. Liberty Medical 1, ambulance ready for evac. Where do you need me? Static hissed. Then a strained voice came back. Medical 1, hold at the aid station. We've got wounded inbound from several sectors. Prepare for transport to surgical. Copy, she answered, firing up the engine. Even before she reached the aid station, she could see the firefight tightening. Tracers arced like red comets across the compound. Another deafening explosion rolled through, the ammo dump going up, shaking the ground beneath her tires. She swung the ambulance around debris, headlights cutting through dust and smoke. The aid station ahead was already catching small arms fire, bullets sparking off sandbags and concrete. Evan Cross and his fire team sprinted past her, rifles up, heading for the east wall. Even in the chaos, Cross managed to yell over his shoulder, "Shaw, park that rig at the aid post and stay put. Let the real soldiers handle the fight." She ignored him completely and kept driving. Her eyes tracked the pattern of impacts, the direction of movement. This wasn't chaos. It was orchestrated. She'd seen it before, in other places, under other flags. This was a professional assault by people who knew exactly what they were doing. The aid station itself was barely holding together, running on pure training and adrenaline. Wounded were already pouring in. One sergeant with a leg wound pumping blood, a lieutenant shredded with shrapnel, a young specialist whose right arm hung by a thread. The medics worked fast and hard, but the math was merciless. There were too many of them and not enough hands, and incoming fire was creeping closer with every minute. Sergeant Noah Price, the senior medic, spotted Riley the moment she pulled up. "Shaw!" he shouted, pointing to 3 soldiers laid out on litters. "These 3 need transport to surgery now. Can you get them there?" "We need immediate transport to the surgical facility. Can you get them there?" Noah Price's voice was flat with urgency. Riley scanned the route. 300 meters of open ground between the aid post and the hardened surgical bunker. A lane currently swept by intermittent machine gun fire from enemy positions that had already breached the outer wire. It was possible, if she timed it perfectly and moved fast. "I can get them there," she said simply. They loaded the wounded with practiced speed. Riley strapped them in, checked IV lines, and secured everything that might shift during a rapid dash. Then she climbed into the driver's seat and mapped her path. Not the straight line, which would be suicide. She planned to use ruined structures for cover, to move in the pauses between bursts, and to trust that painted red crosses might still buy them a few seconds. The run was 90 seconds of deliberate risk. She stomped the accelerator, letting the armored mass of the ambulance plow through debris and close-off choke points on her alternate lane. Bullets sparked along the reinforced panels. One round shattered the passenger window, spraying glass across the cab. But she kept her foot down, weaving between obstacles and using whatever blunted the incoming fire. The patients in back were tossed around far more than anyone would like, but they were still alive and breathing. She reached the surgical entrance, backed the vehicle up to shield the stretcher teams, and put armor between the wounded and the gunfire. The surgical crew flowed out immediately. hauling casualties inside with the practiced urgency of people used to working under fire. "3 more incoming," Price's voice crackled over the radio. "Shaw, can you make another run?" Riley was already turning the wheel. "On my way." Over the next 30 minutes, she ran that route 4 more times, each trip growing riskier as enemy control tightened. On the 5th run, an RPG slammed down less than 3 meters from her vehicle, the blast rocking the ambulance and ringing her ears. But she kept moving, because if she stopped, people would die. Everything changed during the 6th run. She was strapping 2 more patients in when the aid station took direct hits from a heavy machine gun that had somehow been emplaced on the eastern ridge overlooking their position. The burst walked across the sandbags, forcing everyone flat. Riley flattened too, but from her angle she saw the problem immediately. The machine gun had an unobstructed field of fire on both the aid post and the route to surgery. Any vehicle attempting to cross would be exposed for at least 10 seconds, ample time for that gunner to shred even armored panels. "We're pinned," Price said, blunt and fatal. "We can't move. We can't evacuate." "That gun has to go," Evan Cross barked over the net, voice raw. "All units. Enemy fighters have breached the eastern perimeter. QRF engaged and taking casualties. Immediate support needed." Riley's brain had already clicked into a different set of calculations. Tactical thinking rooted deeper than her current job. The machine gun nest sat roughly 200 meters away on an elevated rock-sheltered ridge. A direct attack from the base would be suicide. But a drainage culvert ran along the compound's eastern edge, designed for flash floods, wide enough for a person to crawl through, and it put anyone who used it within effective range of the gun if they were willing to try. She glanced at the ambulance, at the wounded waiting for evacuation, then at the M4 stowed in the cab, the rifle she'd carried these past 3 weeks without ever firing beyond qualification rounds. The weapon everyone had assumed was merely part of her kit, decorative at best. Price saw her eye the rifle and jumped to the wrong conclusion. "Shaw, don't even think about that. You're a driver, not infantry. Call for fire. Get mortars on that position." "Fire support's tied up across 3 sectors," Riley replied quietly. "Those casualties won't last 10 minutes without evac." She moved to the ambulance, grabbed the M4, and the rifle came up like a second nature. Muscle memory guiding hands that had rehearsed these motions until they were automatic. She checked the chamber, confirmed the mag seated, cinched the sling for movement. Each action efficient, practiced, the economy of someone who had done it more times than she could count. "Shaw, what are you doing?" Price's voice sounded equal parts alarm and disbelief. She met his eyes and, for the first time in 3 weeks, let him see past the neat, unremarkable cover she'd kept. "I'm taking out that machine gun nest so you can get those wounded out. Give me 8 minutes." "You'll be dead before you make 50 meters, he spat. "Probably not," she said, turning toward the culvert mouth. "And if I am, someone else can try. Those soldiers don't have 8 minutes to wait on artillery." Before anyone could physically stop her, she was moving. The drainage culvert sat exactly where her mental map placed it. 3 feet across, concrete-lined, angling toward the eastern ridge. She dropped low, rifle leading, senses keyed to every sound, and crawled the 60 meters through the cramped, stale tunnel that smelled of old water and rust. The machine gun above erupted in sustained bursts, the noise warping through the culvert and making distance hard to judge. But she'd run this kind of approach before in other theaters where mistakes meant death. She climbed out where the drainage spilled onto the hillside, directly behind the enemy emplacement. The crew consisted of 3 fighters, 1 manning the weapon, 2 feeding belts, and watching sectors below. They dug into good cover, rock shielding their flanks, elevation giving them killing angles. Professional, capable, dangerous. Riley took 3 seconds to read the angles, pick firing positions, and sequence targets so none could react. Then she moved. Her suppressed shots were nearly lost under the machine gun's roar. The first fighter dropped without ever knowing someone was behind him. The second began to pivot for his AK, but Riley's controlled double took him before he could get the rifle on target. The third had a heartbeat to register what was happening, wide eyes, and then the rounds found him too. 8 seconds from first shot to silence, the machine gun's voice died with its crew. Riley moved to secure the site, clearing each fighter to make sure they posed no further threat, then turned the captured weapon back down the approach in case more enemy were coming up. Aid station, this is Shaw. Machine gun position neutralized. You're clear to evac. The radio hung in stunned quiet before Price's voice returned, equal parts shock and awe. Shaw, what the hell? How did you, Staff Sergeant? We can sort my background later if we're still breathing, she said. For the next 40 minutes, she held that high ground, using the captured gun to cover evac as litter teams moved and QRF elements reinforced the perimeter. From her vantage, she watched the eastern approach and poured accurate fire onto enemy attempts to cross open ground. 3 separate pushes to retake the ridge failed because Riley knew how to employ the PKM as well as anyone. Despite it being a Russian-made weapon, she technically should never have trained on. The situation steadied once Apache helicopters swung in overhead, their 30mm chain guns systematically shredding enemy positions with thermal-guided rounds. The ground assault collapsed as fighters realized their supporting fires were gone and they were now exposed to air assets they had no answer for. Within 20 minutes, the perimeter was secure, the attackers in retreat, and the immediate nightmare over. Riley collected the captured machine gun, gathered 3 AKs and several magazines that would have to be logged as captured equipment, and made the slow walk back to the aid station. The return route feeling longer now that adrenaline was finally ebbing and exhaustion crept into her limbs. Sergeant Noah Price met her at the entrance, his face registering that he was looking at someone entirely different from the ambulance driver he'd known for 3 weeks. Behind him, Evan Cross and his team watched with expressions that ranged from stunned to something like fearful respect. Those casualties made it to surgery, Price reported, all stable, all alive. Because you took out that gun, Cross said. Riley only nodded, too drained for a long conversation. Good. That's what mattered. Cross started to speak, faltered, then tried again, struggling to reconcile what he'd just seen with the dismissive opinion he'd formed earlier. Soldiers don't normally take a fortified position alone, he implied. I know, she said, finishing his thought for him. Can we talk after I file my AAR and get some rack time? Before anyone answered, a Humvee rolled up and Lieutenant Colter's Marion Holt stepped out. Flanked by a civilian who carried the weathered look of someone hardened by years in tough places, Caleb Stone from Defense Intelligence. When Stone's eyes met Riley's, a flicker of recognition and professional respect passed between them. Staff Sergeant Shaw, Holt said carefully, this is Caleb Stone, DIA. He's requested to speak with you immediately about tonight. Riley met Stone's gaze and understood why he'd come. The carefully kept cover she'd maintained for 3 weeks had been stripped away in 40 minutes of doing exactly what she'd been trained to do. Yes, ma'am. I'll provide whatever you need. The debrief took place in Holt's secure office, where classified conversations happened and uncomfortable questions got asked. Riley sat across from Holt and Stone, while Chief Logan Ward lingered in the corner, finally hearing answers to the notes he'd been collecting. Your official file shows basic combat training, AIT as a motor transport operator, and 4 years in logistics, Holt began. Nothing here explains tonight. Before Riley could respond, Stone cut in. Her official record is correct, Colonel, as far as it goes. But Staff Sergeant Shaw has a secondary file. Classified, special access only. I'm authorized to provide context that isn't in the standard documentation. Holt looked between them, visibly displeased at discovering a subordinate with capabilities she hadn't been briefed on. She's one of yours? She asked. Not anymore, Stone replied. But she was. For 7 years embedded with naval special warfare, providing combat support in maritime operations, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and several other theaters that don't appear on normal paperwork. She logged 187 missions with SEAL elements in denied areas, a tempo and record that makes her something of a legend where that label is rarely earned. Ward straightened, incredulous. 187 missions? That's not human. Nobody deploys that often without breaking. Stone's smile was thin. Shaw isn't nobody, Chief. She's one of fewer than 20 people who completed a specialized program blending advanced tactical tradecraft with logistics and support operations. The kind of support we send when the mission is too risky for standard units and too important to risk failure from inadequate logistics. The program, he added, doesn't exist on official doctrine. Riley listened as her hidden past was laid out to colleagues who'd worked beside her for weeks, with no idea what she really was. She felt exposed in ways that had nothing to do with combat. Holt's question was practical and blunt. Why was someone with that background driving ambulances at my base while concealing it from command? Stone's reply was clinical. A transition program. Operators who spend extended time in classified communities rotate into conventional forces to preserve mental health, enable career progression, and reintegrate. Shaw had volunteered for the transition, serving a standard deployment, integrating into a regular unit, and keeping quiet about prior assignments unless circumstances forced disclosure. Stone explained it plainly. Operators who spent years in deep classified work eventually had to rotate through conventional units. It wasn't just policy, it was survival. The rotation helped them reset mentally, rebuild a normal rhythm, and keep a career path open without burning out. Riley Shaw had volunteered for that transition. The deal was simple. 1 standard deployment, conventional duties, full integration, and silence about her past, unless absolutely necessary. Tonight definitely qualified as necessary. Chief Logan Ward, still, said dryly. Stone nodded. Exactly. My job is to make sure there are no negative administrative or career consequences for her breaking cover. What Staff Sergeant Shaw did falls under emergency combat actions to preserve coalition lives. No regulations broken, no procedures bypassed. She acted exactly as trained because the moment demanded it. Lieutenant Marion Holt weighed this, her mind running through what it meant for command trust and unit cohesion. I'm not going to reprimand someone who saved lives and helped defend this base, she said. But I also can't ignore that I've had an operator with advanced special warfare training working anonymously in my motor pool for 3 weeks. That decision's hers, Stone replied, turning to Riley. You've more than fulfilled your transition terms. No one expected you to engage in combat during a supposed quiet rotation. You can request immediate return to your old community, resume operations at the highest level, or stay here, finish out your deployment, and keep working in logistics. Your choice. The room fell silent. Riley thought of the 3 quiet weeks spent driving her ambulance. Routine, calm, even peaceful compared to everything that came before. She thought of Evan Cross and his team, who'd underestimated her but had fought fiercely that night, and of Noah Price, who'd done his duty under fire without the benefit of elite training. She thought of every ordinary soldier at Forward Operating Base Liberty, doing their best with what they had. I'd like to stay and complete my deployment, she said softly. Keep driving, supporting the medics, and pass on what I know, so maybe next time they're better prepared. Stone gave a small, knowing smile. You always preferred building others up rather than being the lone hero. I'll file it accordingly. Officially, you're still a transport operator with medical duties. What happened tonight stays classified. People here know, but beyond Liberty, you're just another driver waiting to rotate home. When Stone left, Holt dismissed everyone but Riley. They sat in quiet for a long moment before the colonel finally said, I'm putting you in for a commendation, Shaw. I don't know what classification it'll carry, but what you did deserves it. Thank you, ma'am, Riley said. But the real credit goes to everyone who stood their ground tonight, even scared and outgunned. In the weeks that followed, Forward Operating Base Liberty returned to its uneasy version of normal. Though normal had been permanently redefined, Riley went back to her ambulance runs and medical transports. But the way people looked at her had changed completely. Soldiers began greeting von Riley Shaw with genuine respect. Medics asked for her input on trauma care under fire. Even Evan Cross approached one morning looking far less sure of himself. Shaw, he said, awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck. I was wrong about you. Completely wrong. I don't know what else to say except I'm sorry. She met his eyes evenly. Start by treating everyone with respect, no matter their job. Drivers and logistics troops aren't lesser soldiers. We're all part of the same fight. Cross gave a crooked grin. Fair enough. Maybe you could run some tactical training for the rest of us who thought we knew combat, but clearly have gaps. Riley smiled faintly and returned to checking her vehicle. Yeah, I can do that. Soon she was teaching classes on small unit movement, combat medicine under pressure, and defensive coordination. She shared lessons drawn from 187 missions without ever revealing classified details. Practical, life-saving techniques that spread quickly across the base and made everyone sharper. 2 months later, Chief Logan Ward pulled her aside. I've been offered a spot at Fort Lee, developing curriculum for combat support training. They want a program for when logistics and combat overlap. I told them I'd only take it if you came on as co-instructor. Riley thought about it. Everything she'd learned could finally be passed on properly, not just improvised in the field. I'll need to clear it through channels, she said. Take your time, he replied. The offer stands. A week later, she accepted. Teaching felt right. A way to multiply her experience beyond one battlefield. On her final day at Forward Operating Base Liberty, Riley made one last supply run. Crossed and Noah Price rode with her, the 3 of them quiet until Cross finally asked what had been on his mind. That night, when you went after that gun alone, were you scared? Riley kept her eyes on the road. Terrified, she admitted. But fear's just information. It tells you what matters most. The only thing that counts is what you do with it. And what did you do? He asked. My job, she said simply. They drove on in easy silence. Three soldiers who now understood that strength often hides where no one expects it. That the person who seems ordinary might be the one who saves everyone when it all falls apart. Riley Shaw would go on to train thousands of support personnel in advanced combat readiness, reshaping how the military prepared its logisticians for modern war. But she never forgot those quiet weeks as the invisible ambulance driver at Liberty, the night everything changed, and the truth she learned there. Sometimes the best thing you can do is let people underestimate you until they need you to be something more. The wolf doesn't announce itself to the flock. It just does what wolves do when the sheep are in danger. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories from Old Bill's Tales.